How are you?
Good, how are you?
Great, thanks.
Welcome back to GBGuns. Graham Bates here, and I'm with Dean of Primary Weapon Systems. Dean is founder and owner, and something that I didn't realize, you notice that there's a whole lot of wood behind us, is the company's roots actually go back to AKs.
Yes. We started out as AK Concepts in 2005. And a lot of people ask, how did you go from making AK-47s to getting into piston-driven AR, the whole progression. And it's, as with a lot of gun companies, it's a long meandering road of different things. And as we all know, things have changed immensely from the environment in 2005. You got to remember in 2005 too, one of the main compensators was the Miklik brake.
Yeah.
Very effective, incredible brake, but you put it on a short rifle and it does not. There's so much concussion that it would.
Yeah, loud and fireballs out of control.
But it's a crazy good compensator. But that was really that was the staple on the market at the time. And so, in that same time, we brought in a series of parts kits. For AK-47s when ATF told me I couldn't have an FFL at my house with an SOT anymore, so now I had to get a commercial location, and then I had to go, well, now I got a commercial location, I got to find a profit center from this, and it all evolved into this. And so we ended up bringing in some of the first Yugoslavian kits that were available. As you can kind of see here, the underfolders, it had the wider trunnion, and at the time there was really no receivers on the market. So there's a bunch of parts kits, but there were no way of making them into rifles. So we brought them in, found a way to get the receivers done, and then we got to the point that we went through those kits and we were running out of them. And we ended up, and we had a few of the AMD 65 kits, which anyone that's familiar with this knows that the barrel's short. It's not the 16-inch.
Yeah.
Long before pistol braces or anything was a thing. And so we were trying to make these commercially marketable as a Title I firearm.
And it's funny you mentioned 05, because in 06, I was in Afghanistan, and we were equipping the Afghan National Army with some of these. That was my first exposure to this model, and I thought, that's a weird-looking AK.
Yep. And so we had these, and so we're like, well, we got to get something to pin to the end of the barrel to make these parts kits saleable. And we had like 20 of them. And so what I started looking at is anyone that knows the standard slant brake from an AK-47. Well, that has an asymmetrical design, and that's not common.
Yeah.
It's very uncommon, in fact, at the time for guns. If you had a comp, you had a symmetrical something. And so the first one we did, the JTAC 47 is the idea is that's keeping the rifle from coming up and to the right as your torso moves under recoil.
Yeah.
And so I cut this side down deeper than this side, and these were a little longer that would give us the legal length. And we went over and shot the first prototype, and it's like, that's pretty magical. Like, that actually works. So it was literally like one prototype, and it worked. And then at the time, it's like, well, why don't we make just compensators? Because we're out of parts kits. Let's get into just this. And at the time, there wasn't much where, most people think of our compensators, or all compensators, as loud. They direct blast rearward. But at the time, this was still way quieter and way less offensive than the other products on the market at the time. And so the first product was the JTAC 47. Partner at the time is just like, hey, we need to get in the AR business. Like, well, we're named AK Concepts. How's that work? And so we moved on and said, all right, let's make one for the AR-15. So 48 prototypes later, because it turned out that I kind of just lucked out on the first one, but with the AR-15 design, it's lighter, there's not as much recoil impulse, and it's really easy to get negative recoil.
Yeah, and something a lot of people, I think consumers don't understand on brakes is your bore diameter, the volume of gas, and the velocity of that gas affects how effective a muzzle device is.
Absolutely, and if anyone, it's really hard to explain negative recoil to people that haven't experienced it, but when the rifle comes down and back, it's one of the weirdest feelings, especially the more pronounced it is. It's very odd. I'm sure you've experienced it.
Yeah, overcompensated.
And there's issued military rifles that have it with what comes, the muzzle device that comes on them. And so we started doing that, and we're like, oh, you can actually drive the barrel down too far. So it took a lot of balance, and we ended up with this. Well, we sent this item to ATF to have it approved as a non-flash hiding device. Again, back at the time, that was important, because then you could ship to 50 states. And they sent us back a high-speed video showing a flare, almost like a hot rod coming out of flash here, but then this ball of fire was all out front. Well, we're like, well, maybe we can fix that then. I mean, if it was coming out of here, there's not much we could do.
Yeah.
But we can do something out here. And so then that evolved into the FSC 556, is we put flash hiding tines on the front. Again, at the time, the Gemtech Halo was a big thing. And so I started with 3/4 inch long tines, and it produced about a 6-foot ball of spark. A weirdest thing. And they're like, hey, make it fit in the Halo, we'll promote it for you. And at the time, you know, that's a pretty big deal for us, you know, a couple guys in a garage of like, Gemtech's gonna, you know, talk about our product. So all I could think to do to fit in there is I cut the tines back to make it fit in that, and that took all the spark away. And so we were the first one to do and get a patent on having a compensator with a flash hider in front, which is kind of the norm somewhat, you know, for a while. I think it's kind of dying back a little bit, but that's where we started. The FSC 30 is still shipped on the FN SCAR on all the civilian models, mainly because it is 50 state legal. It's identified as a non-flash hiding device, so they don't have to worry about state by state, and it controls the recoil very well on that heavier 308 rifle. So short, long story, however you want to put it, that's what got us from AKs to muzzle devices. Then what got us into rifles, we started doing demo videos, and we just wanted to show how cool our compensators were. So we would take it out with a beta mag. Anyone that's played that game knows how that was at the time too. And so, but we'd go out and you'd try to hold the gun right and your tongue right and everything right, and try to get a 100-round mag dump for a video to show that this thing doesn't really move at all. And we couldn't get with the M16s we had at the time. We didn't know what we didn't know. So we didn't have Colts and we didn't have LMTs. We had pieces and parts, and we assumed that every piece and part was the same. And so we'd go out and we couldn't get it to run, but we'd take out, you know, the AMD 65 and do the same video, and we just do the video, put it back in the case, and then one day we realized that we had 1,500 rounds for that gun, and no one had even thought about it because it never was a problem. And we brought back the M16 every time and stripped it, cleaned it, and changed parts, and tried to figure out what was going on there. And the base of knowledge at that time for myself on an M16, you know, it's like you think you know, but looking back, it's like I probably understood that design at like 20% of all the stuff that was there. And so, but then that was also when the 416s were coming on heavy. So like 416 would solve all our problems, but we couldn't get one. I mean, at that time, you couldn't hardly get one with a law letter unless you had a big name behind you. So
in trying to prove and demonstrate muzzle brakes, you came to a similar discovery to what I did in Afghanistan and later Iraq of these freaking AKs don't die. And then I come back to the States and got my first AR. Spent way too long in Europe, so I couldn't own private firearms over there. And some AKs, and I found myself shooting the AK more because I appreciate it, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, where you're getting rain and nasty weather, and then maybe a little bit of laziness mixed in, that piston system was keeping it cooler and cleaner.
Yes, absolutely. And the AK has a lot of advantages from that standpoint on reliability, which we don't have time to get into. And
so building AKs turned into needing muzzle devices. Having muzzle devices turned into wanting it to apply to other things. But the ARs at the time weren't quite there.
And we didn't know enough to know that why you spent the money on a Colt or a military level. We just assumed that the civilian grade was as good, and we were wrong in that.
Quite honestly, a lot of consumers don't have any idea either. You get what you can afford, or you're shopping based on your budget, and then you end up with frustration. So it seems to me the logical step might be to try to find a way to put AK reliability into an AR.
That was our entire concept. And so, you know, at the time, you know, there were some